The Dominion ruled over 200 star systems, and they had done so for nearly 10,000 years. When humanity finally reached the stars and made first contact with the galactic community, the Dominion looked at these small, soft creatures from Earth and saw nothing worth respecting. The Galactic Council met to decide what territory to grant the newcomers, and the ambassador suggested the outer fringe. He suggested the asteroid belt known as the Dead Zone. He suggested a place where 17 other species had tried to establish colonies and failed. The council agreed because nobody else wanted to give humanity anything better. Captain Jack received the coordinates on a cold Tuesday morning aboard the cargo hauler that carried the last of Earth's colonial supplies. He stood on the observation deck and watched the stars drift past the windows while his chief engineer Lisa Vance read the official documents aloud. The Dominion had granted humanity salvage rights to a region of space filled with broken ships and abandoned stations. They called it a gift. They called it an opportunity. Jack called it exactly what it was. "They gave us a graveyard," he said quietly. Lisa lowered her tablet and joined him at the window. She was a practical woman who had spent 20 years building things that other people said could not be built. She had constructed the first fusion plant on Mars, and she had designed the engines that carried humanity to distant stars. Nothing in her career had prepared her for this moment. Nothing had prepared her to see humanity's future reduced to a field of floating garbage. "The manifest lists over 900 derelict vessels," she said. "Most of them are older than human civilization. The Dominion has been dumping their trash here for centuries." Jack turned away from the window. "What about the stations?" 7 orbital platforms in various states of decay. No atmosphere, no power, no value according to the survey teams. The colonial fleet consisted of 12 ships carrying 50,000 people. They had left Earth with hope in their hearts and dreams of building something new among the stars. Now, they drifted toward a cosmic junkyard that nobody else wanted. Jack felt the weight of their expectations pressing down on his shoulders. Commander Ben Drake arrived on the deck with a security detail behind him. Ben was the military liaison assigned to protect the colony, and he took his duties seriously. He was a tall man with gray eyes and a calm voice that never seemed to rise above a conversational tone. He had served in 3 wars on Earth, and he had seen enough conflict to know when trouble was coming. "Command wants your assessment," Ben said. "They want to know if we should turn back." Jack almost laughed at the suggestion. Turn back to what? Earth was a dying world choking on pollution and overcrowding. The other colonies established by alien species had no room for human refugees. This garbage dump was the only home humanity had left. "Tell them we stay," Jack replied. "Tell them we make it work." The fleet entered the dead zone 3 days later, and the colonists got their first real look at their new territory. Broken hulls drifted in silent clouds of debris. Ancient reactors leaked radiation into the void. Weapon scars marked the sides of ships that had died in battles fought before humans learned to make fire. It was a monument to failure, and they had given it to humanity as a joke. Lisa assembled her engineering team in the main cargo bay of the lead ship. Among them was a young technician named Danny Cole, who had graduated top of his class from the Martian Technical Institute. Danny had a gift for understanding how things worked, and more importantly, he had a gift for understanding how broken things could work again. He spent the first week everything the salvage teams brought back to the fleet. "Shield generators," he reported during a briefing. "Engine components, sensor equipment. At least 40 different species contributed to this junkyard over the centuries." Lisa studied the inventory with growing interest. "Any of it functional?" "Individually, no. Everything is damaged or incomplete or incompatible with everything else." Danny paused and a strange light entered his eyes. "But together, I think we might be able to do something interesting." The idea was radical and possibly insane. Danny proposed combining technology from different species to create something entirely new. The aliens had never attempted such a thing because their engineering traditions were rigid and specialized. An engineer would never dream of mixing his people's work with designs. The very thought would be considered offensive. Humans had no such traditions. Humans had spent their entire history borrowing and adapting and combining ideas from different cultures. It was how they had survived ice ages and built empires and crossed the ocean to discover new continents. Innovation through integration was written into human nature. Jack authorized the project after a long night of discussion with his senior staff. They would need to keep it secret from the Dominion observers who occasionally passed through the region. The aliens expected humanity to struggle and beg for assistance. They expected the colonists to come crawling back to the council within a year, asking for relocation to a better territory. Jack intended to disappoint them. The engineers hollowed out the largest asteroid in the field and transformed it into a hidden construction facility. They named it Haven because that was what it would become. Inside its rocky walls, they began the work of sorting through centuries of alien garbage and finding the pieces that could be made useful again. Lisa worked around the clock coordinating the teams. Danny spent his nights studying technical manuals from species that had gone extinct before humanity existed. A metallurgist named Kate experimented with alien alloys until she discovered a combination that was stronger than anything humans had ever produced. A weapons specialist named Amy rebuilt targeting systems that had been abandoned as too complex to maintain. Months passed, and the project grew beyond anything Jack had originally imagined. They were not just repairing broken equipment anymore. They were creating something new, something that had never existed in the long history of galactic civilization. The ambassador visited the colony once during this period. He toured the public facilities and observed the humans living in their cramped habitation modules. He clicked his mandibles in satisfaction at the sight of these primitive creatures, struggling to survive in the wasteland his people had given them. He returned to the Dominion Council and reported that humanity would collapse within 2 years. He never asked to see the asteroid called Haven. He never imagined that the garbage his people had discarded could become the foundation of something extraordinary. Jack stood in the hidden and watched the skeleton of a ship taking shape in the construction cradles. It was ugly and asymmetrical and built from pieces that were never meant to fit together. It was also the most advanced vessel that human hands had ever created. "What should we call it?" Lisa asked. Jack considered the question carefully. This ship represented everything humanity had endured since arriving in the dead zone. It represented their refusal to accept the fate that the galaxy had chosen for them. "The Reclaimer," he said, "because we are taking back our future." 8 months had passed since humanity arrived in the dead zone, and the Reclaimer was beginning to look like a real ship. Lisa Vance stood on the observation platform inside Haven and watched teams of engineers welding hull plates into place. Sparks flew through the zero-gravity environment like tiny stars being born and dying in the same instant. The work never stopped. 3 shifts ran around the clock because there was no time to waste, and everyone understood what was at stake. Danny Cole floated beside her with a tablet in his hands displaying the latest structural analysis. The young engineer had not slept properly in weeks, but his eyes were bright with excitement. He had spent his entire life dreaming of building something that mattered, and now he was helping to create a ship that could change the course of human history. "The frame is holding better than we expected," he reported. "Kate's alloy is incredible. We tested it against Dominion standard hull plating, and it performed 300% better in every category." Lisa nodded slowly. Kate had earned her place in history with that discovery. The metallurgist had combined composites with human steel manufacturing techniques to produce something called. They had abandoned the formula centuries ago because their rigid production methods could not create it efficiently. Human factories used flexible processes that adapted to whatever materials were available. What they considered impossible was merely difficult for human workers. The The reclaimer measured 400 meters from bow to stern, and it looked like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. Its hull combined angular design elements with curved sensor housings and blocky human engineering compartments. An alien observer might have called it ugly or confused. Jack called it beautiful because it represented human determination made physical. The power systems presented the greatest engineering challenge. Traditional human reactors could not generate enough energy to run alien weapons and shields simultaneously. Alien reactors were powerful but unstable and prone to catastrophic failures. A physicist named Gary proposed combining both approaches into a hybrid design that used human safety systems to contain a fusion core. Gary had studied the technical records of every reactor failure he could find in the salvage archives. The pattern became clear after weeks of analysis. They were terrified of their own technology. They automated everything and kept living operators far away from the dangerous components. This meant that small problems went unnoticed until they became disasters. Humans do things differently, Gary explained during a presentation to the engineering team. We get close to our machines. We listen to them. We feel when something is wrong before the sensors detect it. The first test of the hybrid reactor took place on a quiet night when most of the colony was sleeping. Jack ordered the test kept secret because he was not certain it would work, and he did not want to frighten 50,000 people with a potential nuclear explosion. Lisa stood at the control station with her finger hovering over the emergency shutdown switch. Gary monitored the readings from a dozen different instruments. Danny held his breath and watched the power levels climb. The reactor ignited, and Haven's construction bay lit up like daylight had found its way into the heart of an asteroid. Warning indicators flickered amber for a moment, and then settled into steady green. The power output exceeded every projection Gary had made. The core hummed with perfect stability inside its human-built containment vessel. "It works," Gary whispered. "It actually works." Lisa let out a breath she had been holding for what felt like hours. "Now we need to make it work under combat conditions." The weapons systems required equally creative solutions. Amy had recovered targeting computers from 3 different species, and none of them could communicate with each other. A system spoke one machine language while a system spoke another, and a system refused to recognize any commands that did not come from operators. Installing all 3 systems on the same ship should have been impossible. A communications specialist named Chris solved the problem through pure stubbornness. He spent 2 months studying the programming languages of alien computers and searching for common patterns. Every species needed to accomplish the same basic tasks. They needed to track targets and calculate firing solutions and coordinate multiple weapon systems. The approaches differed, but the goals remained constant. Chris developed a software bridge that translated human commands into whatever format each alien system required. He called it the protocol after an ancient artifact that had helped humans understand lost languages on Earth. The name was appropriate because his creation allowed communication between systems that had never been designed to work together. "One language to rule them all," Chris announced when he demonstrated the system to Jack and the command staff. "Our operators give orders in standard human format, and the protocol converts them automatically. The guns think they are receiving commands. The sensors think they are serving masters. Everyone is happy." The weapons themselves were a collection of salvaged equipment that Amy had spent months repairing and modifying. Plasma cannons lined the forward sections of the reclaimer. Pulse arrays covered the flanks. Torpedo launchers sat in armored compartments near the stern. Human point defense turrets filled the gaps between alien systems. Nothing matched and everything worked. Commander Ben Drake assembled a crew from the colony's security forces and began training them for combat operations. These were not professional soldiers. They were former police officers and emergency responders and ordinary citizens who had volunteered to protect their people. Ben turned them into a fighting force through endless drills and simulations and long hours studying alien tactics. "The Dominion thinks we are helpless," Ben told his recruits on the first day of training. "They expect us to run if anyone threatens us. We are going to teach them a different lesson." The training covered everything from damage control to boarding defense to zero-gravity combat. Ben wanted his people ready for any situation, because he knew the galaxy would not be gentle with humanity once word of the Reclaimer spread beyond the dead zone. Jack watched the ship come together piece by piece and felt something he had not experienced since leaving Earth. He felt hope. They had given humanity garbage expecting them to wither and die. Instead, the colonists had taken that garbage and transformed it into a weapon that could challenge the established powers of the galaxy. The construction teams worked for another 6 months before Lisa declared the Reclaimer ready for its first flight. The ship sat in its cradle gleaming with fresh hull plating and humming with barely contained power. Danny ran final checks on every system while Amy weapons readiness and Chris tested the communications arrays. Jack called a meeting of his senior staff in the Haven Command Center. The people gathered around the table represented the best humanity had to offer. Engineers and scientists and soldiers who had taken an impossible situation and created something extraordinary from it. "Tomorrow we take her out," Jack announced. "Tomorrow we find out if all this work was worth it." Lisa met his eyes across the table. "It will be worth it. We built something they never imagined we could build. Now we show them what humans can do." The Reclaimer waited in the darkness of the asteroid's heart. Its moment was coming. The Reclaimer slid out of Haven's hidden launch bay and entered open space for the first time on a morning that felt historic to everyone who witnessed it. The ship moved slowly at first like a creature learning to walk after a long sleep. Jack sat in the captain's chair and felt the deck humming beneath his feet with the power of the hybrid reactor. The sensation was unlike anything he had experienced on human vessels. This ship felt alive. Lisa Vance monitored the engineering station with steady hands and careful eyes. Every reading matched her projections or exceeded them. The reactor output remained stable at levels that would have been impossible for conventional human technology. The shield generators drew power smoothly without the fluctuations that had plagued their early tests. The Reclaimer was performing exactly as designed. "All systems nominal," Lisa reported. "She is ready for whatever you want to try." Danny Cole sat at the auxiliary engineering console, tracking structural integrity across the entire vessel. The hybrid hull was holding together perfectly despite the stresses of acceleration and maneuvering. Kate, alloy, was proving itself in real conditions just as it had in laboratory tests. Jack gave the order to increase speed gradually. The Reclaimer responded with an eagerness that surprised even the engineers who had built her. The propulsion system had been designed for vessels twice the size of this ship, and the human crew had modified it to deliver even more thrust than the original specifications allowed. The result was acceleration that pushed the crew back in their seats despite the inertial dampeners working at full capacity. "She wants to run," Danny said with a grin spreading across his tired face. "The engines are pulling at the throttle like a racing animal." Jack allowed a small smile to cross his own features. "Then give her some room." The Reclaimer surged forward through the asteroid field that surrounded Haven. Human pilots had trained for months in simulators learning to handle the unusual control systems, and now they were applying those skills in reality. The ship weaved between tumbling rocks and ancient debris with a grace that seemed impossible for a vessel of its size. Every maneuver felt natural and precise. Amy ran weapons diagnostics from her station on the bridge. The targeting systems came online one by one, and the protocol translated her commands flawlessly to every alien computer in the network. Plasma cannons charged and pulse arrays calibrated themselves, and torpedo tubes reported ready status. The Reclaimer was armed and dangerous. Chris monitored communications and sensor feeds from his position near the captain's chair. The sensor arrays provided detection range far beyond anything human ships had ever achieved. He could track objects at distances that would have seemed like fantasy to Earth's military planners. Nothing would approach the reclaimer without warning. The test flight continued for several hours as Jack pushed the ship through increasingly difficult maneuvers. He wanted to find the limits of what they had built. He wanted to know exactly what the reclaimer could do before anyone tried to stop them. Everything changed when Chris raised his hand suddenly and spoke in a tense voice. Contact detected. Patrol cruiser entering the asteroid field on an intercept vector. Jack felt his muscles tighten. They were not supposed to patrol this region regularly. Their presence here meant that someone had noticed unusual activity in the dead zone and reported it to the Dominion. The secret of the reclaimer was about to be exposed. "How long until they reach us?" Jack asked. 15 minutes at their current speed. They are hailing us and demanding identification. Commander Ben Drake had joined the bridge crew for the test flight, and now he stepped forward with a suggestion. "We could run. The reclaimer is faster than anything in the fleet. We could disappear into the debris field and they would never find us." Jack considered the option carefully. Running would preserve the secret for a while longer. It would give them time to complete the 2 smaller ships that were already under construction back at Haven. It would delay the inevitable confrontation with the Dominion. But running would also send a message. It would tell them that humanity was afraid. It would confirm their belief that these primitive creatures from Earth were not worth respecting. Jack had spent too many months watching his people work impossible hours to build this ship. He was not going to hide it in shame. "Open a channel," he ordered. "Tell them we are a human research vessel conducting authorized salvage operations in our assigned territory." Chris transmitted the message and waited for a response. The cruiser continued approaching without slowing down. Its weapons systems remained powered but not yet targeting the reclaimer. The alien commander was curious enough to talk before shooting. The flickered and displayed the image of an officer. The alien had compound eyes that glittered with suspicion and mandibles that clicked rapidly as he studied the strange vessel before him. He spoke in the harsh, clicking language of his species, and the translation software converted his words to human speech. "This vessel does not match any design in our database. You will explain its origin immediately or face detention for operating an unregistered warship." Jack rose from his chair and faced the screen with calm dignity. "This vessel was built from materials found in the territory your council assigned to us. Surely the Dominion expected humanity to make use of the resources we were given." The commander's mandibles stopped clicking for a moment. He had expected fear from these humans. He had expected apologies and excuses and requests for mercy. The confidence in Jack's voice was not something he had prepared to encounter. "You were given refuse," the commander said slowly. "You were given worthless garbage that no civilized species would accept. You were supposed to realize your place in the galactic order." "Our place," Jack replied, "is wherever we choose to make it." The transmission ended abruptly as the commander cut the channel. Chris tracked the alien cruiser as it altered course and accelerated toward a hyperspace jump point. Within minutes, the ship vanished from sensors entirely. Lisa looked at Jack with concern in her eyes. "They will report what they saw. The Dominion will send a fleet to investigate." Jack nodded slowly. He had expected this moment since the first day of construction. The reclaimer could not remain secret forever. Sooner or later the galaxy would learn what humanity had accomplished, and they would respond with force. "Then we prepare," Jack said. "We finish the salvage in the Defiant. We train our crews for combat. We turn the dead zone into a fortress." Amy spoke up from her weapons station. "How long do we have?" "Weeks if we are lucky, maybe less." Ben Drake straightened his uniform and addressed the crew. "Then, we do not waste a single hour. Every minute counts from now until the Dominion arrives." The reclaimer turned back toward Haven carrying a crew that understood their world had just changed forever. The test flight had proven their ship could perform beyond expectations. Now, they needed to prove that humans could fight beyond expectations as well. The countdown to war had begun. The fleet arrived 6 weeks after the first encounter, and it came with overwhelming force. 12 warships emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the asteroid field with their weapons already glowing hot and ready to fire. The flagship was a massive dreadnought that dwarfed even the largest human vessel. Its commander transmitted a single message across all frequencies demanding immediate surrender. Jack stood on the bridge of the reclaimer and listened to the ultimatum with a calm expression that hid the tension in his chest. The Dominion wanted humanity to hand over the illegal warship and submit to whatever punishment the Council decided. They promised mercy if the humans cooperated. They promised destruction if they resisted. Lisa Vance had worked miracles during the 6 weeks of preparation. The engineering teams had completed the Salvage and the Defiant, two smaller frigates built using the same hybrid technology as the Reclaimer. The ships were not as powerful as the flagship, but they were fast and maneuverable and crewed by people who had trained without rest since the Scout departed. "All ships report ready," Ben Drake announced from the tactical station. Marines standing by at boarding defense positions, weapons charged and shields at maximum. The human fleet consisted of 3 ships facing 12 enemy vessels. The math was simple and brutal. They outnumbered them 4-1 in hulls and them by a factor of 10. Any conventional military analysis would predict a quick and decisive victory for the Dominion forces. The commander appeared on though with his compound eyes gleaming with anticipation. He expected this encounter to be brief and satisfying. He expected to crush these arrogant primitives and return home as a hero of the Dominion. "You have constructed weapons without authorization," the commander stated. "You have threatened galactic security with your reckless actions. Surrender your vessels and the Council may spare your colony." Jack stepped forward until he stood directly in front of the screen. "You gave us your garbage because you believed we were worthless. You expected us to die quietly in this wasteland. You were wrong about us. You cannot win this battle. Your species has no experience in naval warfare. Your technology is primitive. Your defeat is inevitable. Then come and prove it." Jack cut the transmission with a gesture and turned to face his crew. These were people who had left everything behind on Earth to build a new future among the stars. They had worked impossible hours and solved impossible problems and created something that should not exist. They were not going to surrender it without a fight. "All ships engage," Jack ordered. "Show them what humans can do." The battle began with the Reclaimer diving straight into the heart of the enemy formation. Amy had studied tactics for months, and she knew exactly how their commanders thought. They expected enemies to keep distance and exchange fire from long range. They did not expect an opponent to charge directly at their guns. The Reclaimer's shields flared as enemy weapons struck from multiple directions. The hull absorbed impacts that would have destroyed conventional ships. Amy fired back with perfect precision, targeting the weak points in shield harmonics that Chris had discovered in captured technical manuals. "Their shields are designed to repel energy weapons at standard frequencies," Amy explained as she worked. "But they are vulnerable to specific modulation patterns. We are hitting them where their defenses are weakest." The first cruiser buckled under concentrated fire from the Reclaimer's plasma cannons. Its shields collapsed in a cascade of failing energy, and the hull beneath crumpled like paper. The ship broke apart in a silent explosion that scattered debris across kilometers of space. The Salvage and the Defiant flanked the enemy fleet, drawing fire away from the Reclaimer. Their smaller size made them difficult targets, and their hybrid engines allowed them to outmaneuver the heavier warships. Commander Ben Drake coordinated their movements from his tactical station, directing both frigates like extensions of his own will. The commander had not expected resistance on this scale. His fleet had been assembled to intimidate rather than fight. He had assumed the humans would surrender at the first show of force. Now two of his cruisers were burning, and his formation was breaking apart as captains tried to respond to attacks coming from multiple directions. "Concentrate fire on the lead human vessel," the commander ordered. "Destroy it and the others will fall." 8 ships turned their weapons toward the reclaimer and unleashed everything they had. The human flagship vanished inside a storm of plasma and missiles and directed energy beams. For a moment, it seemed impossible that anything could survive such an assault. Then the reclaimer emerged from the fire with its shield still holding and its weapons still blazing. Gary's hybrid reactor was feeding power to the shield generators at levels that had never encountered. The ship absorbed damage that should have torn it apart and kept fighting. The battle lasted 3 hours, and every minute was desperate and bloody. The Defiant took a critical hit to its engine section during a close pass against an enemy destroyer. Captain Rhodes ordered her crew to abandon ship as the reactor began to fail. Escape pods scattered into the asteroid field while the frigate drifted toward a collision with a massive rock. Lisa watched the Defiant's destruction with pain in her eyes, but there was no time for grief. She rerouted power from damaged systems and kept the reclaimer fighting, even as sections of the ship lost atmosphere and secondary explosions rocked the hull. The tide turned when Amy managed to disable the flagship's main weapon array with a perfectly placed torpedo strike. The dreadnought could still fight, but its most powerful guns were offline. The other captains saw their leader crippled, and their confidence shattered. 4 enemy ships fled into hyperspace, leaving 8 burning hulks drifting among the asteroids. The commander screamed threats of vengeance as his damaged flagship limped away from the battle. He promised that the full might of the Dominion would descend upon humanity for this insult. He promised extinction. Jack did not respond to the threats. He was too busy coordinating rescue operations for the survivors of the Defiant and assessing the damage to his remaining ships. "Status report," he requested quietly. Lisa reviewed the data with hands that trembled slightly from exhaustion. "Defiant is lost, but all escape pods have been recovered. No casualties. Salvage is heavily damaged, but Captain reports she can make it back to Haven under her own power. Reclaimer has significant damage to forward sections, but structural integrity is holding." Jack closed his eyes for a moment and let the weight of what they had accomplished settle over him. 3 human ships had faced 12 warships and won. The battle would be recorded in the annals of galactic history. Every species in the known universe would hear about what happened in the dead zone. "Take us home," Jack said finally. "We have repairs to make and ships to build. This was just the beginning." The reclaimer turned toward Haven with its hull scorched and its crew exhausted. Behind them, the wreckage of the fleet drifted among the asteroids like monuments to human determination. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity was not going to disappear quietly. The scavengers of the dead zone had become warriors, and their war had only just begun. News of the battle spread across the galaxy faster than any ship could travel. They had been humiliated by creatures they considered barely civilized. A species that had been given garbage as a cruel joke had transformed that garbage into weapons that defeated a Dominion fleet. Every government and every military command and every trading guild wanted to know how the humans had accomplished the impossible. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session within days of the battle. Representatives from 40 species gathered in the Great Assembly Hall on the Dominion capital world to discuss what they called the human problem. They demanded immediate punishment. They wanted the human colony destroyed and every survivor sent back to Earth in chains. They wanted the galaxy to forget that their fleet had been beaten by scavengers. Ambassador Maria Santos represented humanity at the council. She was a woman who had spent 30 years navigating the complex politics of relations. She had negotiated treaties and resolved disputes, and built bridges between cultures that had nothing in common. Now, she faced the greatest challenge of her career as the ambassador pointed accusations at her from across the chamber. The humans violated galactic law, they declared. They constructed military vessels without authorization from this council. They attacked a lawful patrol fleet conducting security operations. They must be punished for their crimes against galactic order. Maria rose from her seat and spoke with a calm voice that carried across the vast chamber. The humans defended themselves against an unprovoked assault. The fleet fired first. We have sensor logs from multiple vessels to prove this fact. The chamber erupted in argument as representatives from different species demanded to be heard. They expressed quiet admiration for what humanity had accomplished. Their engineers had studied the technical reports and recognized elements of their own technology in the hybrid designs. They were impressed rather than offended that humans had found new uses for abandoned systems. The representative requested formal technology exchanges with the human colony. Her people had contributed sensor equipment to the salvage field centuries ago, and now they wanted to learn how humans had improved upon those ancient designs. Several other species made similar offers. The vote on the motion for sanctions was close but ultimately failed. The Council could not agree that humanity had done anything wrong by defending itself. More importantly, many Council members recognized that punishing the humans would send a dangerous message. It would tell every minor species in the galaxy that standing up for themselves was forbidden. The Council officially recognized the human fleet as a legitimate military force. They granted humanity expanded territory rights and trading privileges that had been to them before. The garbage dump of the dead zone became recognized as human sovereign space. Jack received the news in his quarters aboard the reclaimer while repair crews worked on the damaged sections of the hull. He read the Council resolution twice before allowing himself to believe it was real. Humanity had won more than a battle. They had won recognition and respect from a galaxy that had dismissed them as worthless. What changed? Danny Cole asked when Jack shared the news with his senior staff. Why did they suddenly decide we matter? Fear, Ben Drake suggested. They saw what we could do with garbage. They are afraid of what we might accomplish with real resources. Lisa shook her head slowly. It is not just fear. It is respect. We proved that we belong here. We proved that humanity can compete with species that have been traveling among stars for thousands of years. The years that followed transformed humanity's place in the galaxy. The shipyards at Haven expanded to produce vessels for other species. Human engineers became sought after consultants who traveled to distant worlds to share their knowledge of hybrid technology. The scavengers of the dead zone became innovators who changed how the galaxy thought about building ships. Jack oversaw the construction of a new fleet that incorporated everything humanity had learned. The Reclaimer remained the flagship, but now it was joined by dozens of cruisers and frigates and support vessels. Each ship blended technology from multiple species in ways that no one had attempted before humans arrived. The hegemony emerged as a threat to galactic stability 15 years after the first battle with the warriors had built an empire through conquest, and now they were expanding toward the core worlds of the galactic community. Every species faced the possibility of subjugation or destruction. The Council called for a unified defense, and they asked humanity to lead it. The request surprised many, but Jack understood the reasoning. Humans had proven they could take disparate elements and combine them into something greater. They had done it with technology, and now the galaxy wanted them to do it with military forces from dozens of species. The Defense Coalition assembled in the Dead Zone, where humanity had first learned to build. Ships from 40 worlds gathered around the asteroid field that had once been considered worthless. Battle cruisers flew alongside scout vessels and destroyers. Former enemies worked together because humans had shown them how. The ambassador approached Maria Santos on the eve of the final battle. He was a different official from the one who had laughed at humanity decades earlier. This one had grown up in a galaxy where humans were respected, and their achievements were studied in military academies across known space. "How did you do it?" he asked with genuine curiosity, replacing the old contempt his species had shown. "How did your people rise so quickly from nothing?" Maria considered the question for a long moment before answering. "You threw us in the garbage and expected us to rot. You forgot that humans have always built our future from whatever materials were available. We survived ice ages with stone tools. We crossed oceans in wooden ships. We reached the stars in vessels held together by determination as much as engineering." She turned to watch the fleet assembling for combat. The reclaimer hung at the center of the formation, with its hybrid hull gleaming in the light of distant stars. Around it, the ships of 40 species prepared to fight together for the first time in galactic history. "You gave us the raw materials," Maria continued. "The rest was up to us." The battle against the hegemony lasted 3 days and cost thousands of lives. But the coalition held together, because humans had taught them how to work as one force instead of 40 separate fleets. The hybrid tactics that Jack had developed in the Dead Zone proved effective when applied to an entire armada. The hegemony fell, and the galaxy entered a new era of cooperation. Human shipyards produced vessels that served every species. Human diplomats negotiated treaties that ended conflicts which had lasted for centuries. Human engineers solved problems that alien scientists had abandoned as impossible. Jack retired to a small home on the asteroid where Haven had been built. He spent his final years watching ships launch from the docks he had constructed, and knowing that each one carried humanity's legacy to distant stars. They had given humanity garbage, expecting them to disappear. Instead, the humans had turned that garbage into the foundation of a new galactic order. They had proven that potential is not determined by what you are given, but by what you choose to create. The scavengers had become the builders, the outcasts had become the leaders, and the galaxy would never underestimate humanity again.